My name is Winnie Mark. My mother's love was the foundation of our home. It was in the worn velvet of the sofa where she'd read to me, in the scent of her jasmine perfume that lingered in the hallway, in the carefully balanced ledgers that built our security. After she died, a part of that foundation crumbled. My father, unmoored and adrift, pleaded for me to be his anchor. I came without hesitation, believing family was the one unshakable thing. I never imagined that in my effort to hold him together, I would hand him the very weapon he would use to dismantle my place in our family forever. Please kindly take a minute to like and subscribe to this channel as I share with us how my father disowned me barely weeks after my mother's death. The call came on a Tuesday. I was in my element, in a high-rise office overlooking the city, finalizing a multi-million-dollar merger. My life was a whirlwind of contracts, strategy, and hard-won success. Winnie? My father's voice was a thin, broken thing on the other end of the line, so unlike the confident baritone I'd known. It's so quiet here, the house, it echoes. I'm so lonely, baby girl. The raw need in his voice was a hook in my heart. Dad, I'm coming, I said without a second thought. I'll wrap things up here and be there by the weekend. Canceling my commitments was a logistical nightmare. My business partner was understanding but concerned. Winnie, this merger, it's a once-in-a-lifetime shot. Are you sure? But I was sure. Money could be made again. My father could not. I packed my life into suitcases, leaving behind my career, my apartment, and my independence. I drove the 5 hours back to my childhood home, my heart heavy with grief for my mother and a determined resolve to care for my father. I pulled into the driveway of the beautiful colonial house my mother had so loved. The garden was slightly overgrown, the paint on the shutters beginning to chip. It felt sad but familiar. I let myself in with my key, calling out, "Dad, I'm here." The smell hit me first. It wasn't the familiar scent of lemon polish and my mother's jasmine. It was an overpowering, cloying aroma of cheap vanilla air freshener and unfamiliar perfume. A woman emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel that was not ours. She was in her late 40s, with sharp features, and hair dyed a uniform, unnatural black. She was wearing my mother's favorite apron. "You must be Winnie," she said, her smile too wide, too practiced. "I'm Gloria. Your father's told me so much about you." She said it as if she were the lady of the house and I were a guest. My father appeared behind her, looking sheepish, his arms snaking around her waist. "Winnie, you made it. Look, sweetheart, I've had some company." My suitcase felt heavy in my hand. This wasn't what I'd expected. This wasn't a grieving widower. This was a man who had already found a replacement. I tried to adapt. I told myself my father deserved companionship, but Gloria's presence was an aggressive takeover. Within days, I found my mother's fine china replaced with garish, mismatched plates. Her collection of classic literature was boxed up in the garage to make room for Gloria's paperback romances. The final straw was when I went to take a bath and found Gloria's toiletries lining the shelf. Among them was my mother's silver-backed hairbrush, tangled with Gloria's dark strands. It was a violation, a desecration. That night, I found my father alone in his study. "Dad, we need to talk," I said, my voice trembling. Gloria, it's so fast. And she's using Mom's things. It's not right. It feels disrespectful." He looked at me, and for a moment, I saw the ghost of my old father, a flicker of guilt. But it was quickly extinguished. "Winnie, your mother is dead," he said, his voice cold and final. "She's not coming back. Gloria makes me happy. You need to deal with it." The words were a physical blow. Deal with it. My grief, my loyalty to my mother was now an inconvenience. The next morning, the atmosphere was icy. Gloria moved through the house with a wounded, martyred air. she whispered to my father in the kitchen, casting tearful glances my way. I could see the poison taking root in his mind. By lunchtime, the switch had been flipped. My father's face was a mask of cold fury. "I think it's best if you leave, Winnie," he said, his voice unrecognizable. "You're causing trouble. You're upsetting Gloria. This is my house, and this is how things are now." "Your house?" I whispered, stunned. "Dad, Mom!" "Get out!" he roared. A sudden summer storm had begun outside, lashing the windows with rain. I was too shocked to cry. I numbly packed my bags. Gloria stood at the top of the stairs, watching me with a faint, triumphant smile. They didn't help me. I dragged my suitcases to my car through the pouring rain, soaked to the skin, my heart shattering into a million pieces. I looked back once. The light was on in the living room, casting their silhouettes against the window. They were already sitting on the sofa my mother had picked out, as if I had never been there at all. A week later, a formal letter arrived from a lawyer. It stated that, effective immediately, I was disowned and disinherited. My father's entire estate, including the house and all investments, the vast majority of which were assets my mother had earned and inherited, were to be left solely to Gloria upon his death. I sat on the floor of my temporary rental apartment, the expensive paper feeling vile in my hands. Friends urged me to fight it. "Contest the will. Your mother would never have wanted this." But I was exhausted. The legal battle would be long, expensive, and soul-destroying. It would mean living in that toxic drama for years. I looked at the letter, then at the city skyline outside my window, the skyline of my own hard-won career. I made a choice. I would not fight for scraps from a table they had poisoned. I would not spend my energy trying to reclaim a past they had already defiled. I crumpled the letter and threw it away. My inheritance was not in a house or a bank account. It was in my mother's resilience, her intelligence, her strength. And that was something they could never take from me. I had a different ladder to climb, and I would not be looking down. The silence in the wake of my father's letter was a vacuum. For a week, I moved through my rented apartment like a ghost, the hurt a fresh, raw wound. The temptation to rage, to hire a lawyer and wage a bitter war, was a constant, humming temptation. But the image of my mother's face, calm and pragmatic, kept surfacing in my mind. She hadn't built her success on drama. She'd built it on focus, intelligence, and an unwavering work ethic. I made a conscious, painful decision. I would not fight for a past they had destroyed. I would channel every ounce of my pain, my anger, and my grief into building a future they could never touch. I threw myself back into my career with a ferocity that startled my colleagues and my business partner, Leo. The merger I'd abandoned was gone, but I went after the next one with a cold, single-minded determination. The boardroom became my battleground. The sting of my father's rejection became the fuel for my negotiation tactics. The memory of Gloria's smug smile gave me the nerve to demand more, to never back down. I worked late nights, the city lights my only companions. I used my savings, not for a legal fight, but for investments. I studied the market with the same intensity my mother had used to manage her own portfolios. My success was no longer just about ambition. It was my armor, my revenge, and my therapy. Leo watched me, concerned. "Winnie, you're burning the candle at both ends. This merger, it's in the bag. You can ease up." Yeah. I just shook my head, revising a contract for the third time. I'm not tired. I was, but the exhaustion was preferable to the emptiness. Slowly, the sharp pain of betrayal morphed into a dull, persistent ache, and then into a hardened resolve. I never completely cut the thread to my old life. I had a few trusted friends back in my hometown. I never asked for updates, but they offered them in hushed, sympathetic tones. The reports were like watching a slow-motion car crash from a distance. "They sold the Victorian dining set, Winnie. Your mom's. Gloria said it was too old-fashioned." I saw your dad at the grocery store. He looks thinner, tired. Gloria's driving a new convertible, bright red. Each piece of news was a little twist of the knife, but also a confirmation. I was building, they were dismantling. The biggest news came a year and a half later. My friend Sarah called, her voice laced with a kind of grim satisfaction. You won't believe it. They've put the house on the market. I froze, the phone pressed to my ear. What? Gloria convinced him it was too big, too much upkeep, that they should cash in and downsize. They're selling everything. I heard they're looking at a condo in one of those adult communities. I hung up the phone, a storm of emotions warring inside me. Rage that they would so carelessly sell my mother's dream home. Grief for the memories being boxed up and sold to strangers, and a fierce, cold triumph. They were erasing themselves. I called my real estate agent that afternoon. The Colonial on Elm Street, the one that just came on the market. I want to make an offer, a cash offer, full asking price, but it must be completely anonymous. Use a corporate LLC. I didn't want the house out of sentimentality. I wanted it as a trophy, a testament to my mother's work and my own. I wanted to own the ground they had thrown me out of. The sale went through without a hitch. My father and Gloria, gleeful at the quick, easy sale, never knew the buyer was the daughter they'd discarded. The reports continued, growing more bleak. They moved into the Sunrise Motel while they looked for the perfect place. That was 3 months ago. I saw Gloria at the bank. She was withdrawing a huge amount of cash. She was talking about a cruise. Your dad's old car broke down. I heard they're using rideshares everywhere. The picture was clear. The money from my mother's life's work, the house, her investments, was being treated like a lottery win. There was no plan, only consumption. Gloria was a parasite, and my father was the willing host, too lost and weak to see he was being bled dry. Then, the reports stopped. For several months, there was nothing. The silence was more telling than any news. 2 years to the month after I was driven out in the rain, I was finally living in the house again. I had spent a fortune restoring it, not to what it was, but to what it should have been. I'd ripped out Gloria's gaudy touches, repainted, refurbished. I put my mother's china back in the cabinets. Her silver hairbrush was on my dresser. The house was once again a home, filled with light and peace. It was mine. One balmy evening, I was on the back patio, the one my mother had loved for her morning coffee. My fiancé, David, was with me. We were laughing, toasting with glasses of wine to our upcoming wedding, to the future we were building in this reclaimed space. A movement at the edge of the property caught my eye. The backyard was bordered by an old, low stone wall, with a public sidewalk on the other side. A man was walking there, slow and unsteady. His shoulders were stooped, his clothes hung loosely on his frame. He moved with the weary gait of someone carrying a profound weight. He stopped and stared at the house, his face a mask of such naked longing and regret that it was painful to see. It was my father. He looked like a ghost. The robust, confident man was gone, replaced by this hollowed-out shell. He was looking at the glowing windows, the beautifully tended garden, the evidence of a life being lived well inside the walls he had given up. He didn't see me at first. His gaze was fixed on the past. Then slowly, his eyes shifted from the house to the patio, to me, to the glass of wine in my hand, to the smile that was still fading from my lips, to the man sitting beside me. Recognition dawned, followed by a wave of pure, unadulterated shock. His jaw went slack. The color drained from his face. He looked from my face to the house and back again, the impossible truth crashing down on him. The daughter he had disowned, the daughter he had cast out into the rain, was not just surviving. She was thriving. In his house. In her house. He stood frozen on the sidewalk, a spectator to the life he could have had, the family he could have cherished. The weight of every bad decision, every cruel word, every dollar squandered, seemed to settle on his shoulders all at once. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I didn't gloat. I simply held his gaze, my expression calm, neutral, and utterly impregnable. He had made his choice 2 years ago, and I had made mine. After a long, agonizing moment, he flinched as if struck, turned away, and continued his slow, shambling walk down the sidewalk, disappearing into the twilight. The ghost of my old life had finally passed by, and for the first time, I felt nothing but a quiet, final peace. The sight of my father, a broken ghost haunting the periphery of his own former life, didn't bring the triumphant surge I might have once expected. Instead, it left a quiet, solemn stillness in its wake. The chapter of my life defined by his approval, or lack thereof, was finally irrevocably closed. He was no longer a villain, he was a cautionary tale. And my home was no longer a monument to my revenge, it was a sanctuary I had built for myself. David squeezed my hand. Was that? Yes, I said, my voice even. Do you want to? He left the question hanging, full of concern. No, I replied, and I meant it. There was nothing left to say. Weeks turned into months. Autumn painted the trees in our yard in fiery hues. The story of my father's decline filtered through the town's gossip chain, each detail more pathetic than the last. Gloria had indeed left him, cleaning out the last of the joint bank accounts and disappearing with a timeshare salesman from a neighboring town. My father was alone, living in a single-room efficiency apartment, surviving on a small pension that was a pittance compared to the wealth he had squandered. I felt a distant pang of pity, the way one might feel for a stranger in a news story. But I did not act. I had spent my childhood loving him and my early adulthood seeking his love in return. I would not spend my peace parenting him. The invitation to the past came on a crisp November morning. I found a folded piece of paper that had been slipped under my front door. It was not a lawyer's letter. It was my father's shaky handwriting on a sheet of cheap notebook paper. Winnie. I know I have no right to ask for anything. I was wrong about everything. I see that now. I am so very sorry. The weight of what I did to you, and to your mother's memory, is a burden I will carry every day. I don't expect your forgiveness, but if you could find it in your heart to see me, just once, I would be grateful. Your father, Robert. I held the note, feeling the thinness of the paper, the desperation in the scrawl. The old Winnie would have crumpled it. The new Winnie simply placed it on the kitchen counter and went about her day. I didn't mention it to David. I needed to sit with the decision alone. For a week, the note remained there, a silent question. Every time I passed it, I asked myself what I wanted. Did I want to see him humbled? To hear him apologize? To finally have the vindication I'd once craved? The answer, when it came, was simple. I didn't need any of that anymore. My vindication was the life I lived. My peace was my own. Seeing him would be an act of charity, not of need. I decided to go. Not for him, for me. To lay the final ghost to rest. I drove to his apartment building, a bleak, beige complex on the wrong side of town. The hallway smelled of stale cabbage and disinfectant. I knocked on his door. He opened it slowly, as if afraid of what was on the other side. He looked older than he had on the sidewalk, smaller. The apartment behind him was stark and clean, but devoid of any personal touch. It was a waiting room for the end of a life. His eyes filled with tears the moment he saw me. "You came," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I came," I said, stepping inside. I did not hug him. He offered me the only chair. He sat on the edge of his neatly made bed, wringing his hands. The words tumbled out of him then, a choked, rambling confession. He spoke of his grief, his weakness, his stupidity. He called Gloria a disease he'd welcomed. He wept for my mother, for the love he'd betrayed, for the daughter he'd thrown away. I listened. I let him speak until he was empty. His apology was everything I had ever wanted to hear 2 years ago. Now it just sounded like facts. When he was done, he looked at me, a desperate hope in his red-rimmed eyes. "Can you ever forgive me, Winnie?" I looked at this broken man, my father, and I felt a profound sense of clarity. Forgiveness wasn't a grand gesture. It was a release. "I don't hold a grudge, Dad," I said, and it was the truth. "What you did was incredibly hurtful. It changed how I see you. It changed our relationship forever. But harboring anger for you, it doesn't hurt you. It would only hurt me, and I've decided to stop hurting." It wasn't the absolution he wanted. He wanted a blanket pardon, a reset button. I was offering him a ceasefire. He nodded slowly, the hope in his eyes dimming into a sad acceptance. He understood. The damage was permanent. "The house, it looks beautiful," he said, changing the subject, unable to bear the weight of the truth. "It is," I said. "It's a home again." I stood up to leave. I had given him what I could. My presence, my listening ear, my absence of malice. It was more than he deserved, and it was all I had to give. Will I see you again?" he asked, his voice small. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "The door isn't locked, but I'm not waiting for you on the other side." I walked out of the bleak apartment and into the bright autumn day. The cold air felt clean in my lungs. I drove back to my home, to my life, to David. I didn't feel lighter or heavier. I felt final. The story was over. The scales would never be balanced, but I had stopped weighing them. That evening, I built a fire in the fireplace my mother had loved. I curled up on the sofa with David, a blanket over our legs. The house was quiet, warm, and filled with a deep, settled peace. The past was a closed book on a shelf. I had finally written my own happy ending.